Europe Dark Ages. What really happened after the fall of Rome, around 476 CE, might surprise you. Rise of empires, spread of a new religion, and the surprising fate of Roman knowledge. Buckle up for the truth. A feature of this period is the rise of Christianity, which initially was a minority religion in the Roman Empire, evolved into the dominant one in Europe. During this time, the Church not only safeguarded culture and knowledge, but also offered stability and order in a chaotic world. In the absence of a strong central government, local leaders, such as kings and lords, gained power during the Dark Ages. These leaders frequently relied on the church and the military for support. Even though literacy and education were undoubtedly declining during this era, there were still scholars committed to preserving and studying classical texts. This preservation of knowledge laid the groundwork for the Renaissance period's eventual resurgence of learning. The Dark Ages were a time of significant change and transformation in Europe's history. There were both elements of decline and progress, with the rise of new political structures, the spread of Christianity, and the preservation of classical learning. These developments paved the way for the development of the modern world. Why is it called the Dark Ages? We travel back to the 14th century. An Italian named Petrarch came up with the term Dark Ages, and it's still in use today. He basically thought that the time after the Roman Empire fell until his time was a big step down in terms of thinking and learning. All that Roman glory and smarts vanished quickly and without a trace. Why did Petrarch think this? Well, he lived in Italy during a crazy political time, so he figured the fall of Rome meant losing a bunch of culture and smart stuff. He saw it as a dark and gloomy period. But here's the twist. Not everyone agrees with Petrarch. Some historians say the Dark Ages had a lot more going on than just doom and gloom. They point out that people made progress in farming, inventing stuff, and figuring out how to run governments. Not to mention the whole Christianity thing and all those monasteries that kept knowledge alive. Basically, the Dark Ages weren't as dark as Petrarch made them out to be. They were more like a time of change, growth, and new beginnings. Some prefer to call them the early Middle Ages because there was a lot of continuity and stuff happening. Dark Ages remains a very complicated topic. It's like a big puzzle with a lot of pieces, and everyone has their own idea of how it fits together. Main events of the Dark Ages. The Roman Empire in the West crashed and burned back in 476 CE. It was a huge deal, and things got really messy for a while. The empire split up into a bunch of smaller kingdoms, each with its own warlord or local leader. This made it hard to keep things in order, and there were a lot of raids and invasions by different tribes, like the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Franks, and Vandals. The economy also took a hit during this time. Trade routes got messed up, and a lot of infrastructure was destroyed, so there wasn't as much money flowing around. Cities, which used to be the centers of business and government, got abandoned or turned into ruins. People moved to the countryside and started farming to take care of themselves. On top of all that, there were a bunch of people moving around and invading. Besides the Germanic tribes, there were also the Vikings, Moors, and Magyars causing trouble. All this chaos led to a mix of cultures with ideas, technologies, and art getting shared between different groups. But things started to get better in the late 8th century when Charlemagne came along and put together the Carolingian Empire. He conquered a bunch of land and made some changes, which brought back some stability and culture to Western Europe. This period is called the Carolingian Renaissance, and it was a time of learning, art, and architecture. But the Carolingian Empire didn't last forever, and when it fell apart, it led to the creation of more stable political units. These kingdoms, like France, England, and Germany, would go on to shape Europe for a long time. The High Middle Ages, 10th, 13th centuries, was a time of big changes in Europe. Cities started to grow, trade picked up again, and powerful kingdoms emerged. Kings like Philip II, Augustus of France, Henry II of England, and Frederick Barbarossa of Germany took charge and made things more stable. They also fought in the Crusades, which were religious wars to conquer Jerusalem and the Holy Land. During the High Middle Ages, feudalism was a big deal. It was a system where people were organized based on land ownership and had different obligations to each other. At the top was the monarch, who gave land to his loyal followers, the vassals, in exchange for military service. These vassals would then have their own vassals, and so on. Most people were serfs who worked on the land of a lord and weren't free to move around. Feudalism was a complicated system that changed over time and in different parts of Europe, but it had a big impact on society and culture. It shaped political, economic, and social relationships for a long time, and it even helped lead to the development of new forms of government, like nation-states. But feudalism started to decline in the late Middle Ages. Things like the growth of trade, the rise of cities, and the development of new military technologies contributed to its downfall. By the end of the 15th century, feudalism was pretty much gone from Europe, replaced by more centralized forms of government. The role of the church. The church was like this huge player in society. It was kind of the big boss of the whole civilization thing. And, it kept Roman culture alive and stuff. Those monasteries were like the OG schools and libraries, where monks spent their time carefully copying and saving important texts. But the church wasn't just about books and stuff. It was also there to help people out with their everyday lives. Like, if you were sick or poor, they'd take care of you. And they were there for big moments too, like when you were born, got married, or, died. They had all these ceremonies and rituals to mark the important parts of life. And let's not forget about the power they had. The church leaders, like bishops and abbots, were just as powerful as the fancy lords. They had a lot of land and money, so they could make decisions that affected everyone. And they played a big part in making sure that kings were in charge and had everyone's support. So even when things were kind of messy and confusing, the church was there to keep everything steady and give people a sense of order. It was like a rock in a stormy sea. And even though the Dark Ages were, dark, the church made sure that the important stuff, like knowledge and civilization, survived for future generations. Innovations in economy and technology. The Middle Ages weren't as boring as everyone says. It wasn't all about knights and castles. People were pretty smart back then and came up with some cool stuff that made farming easier. They invented new plows, horseshoes, and a collar for horses that made them stronger, so they could grow more food and feed more people, and that was a big deal. But trade was a bit of a hassle back then. There wasn't a single currency like we have today, and there were always wars and stuff going on. But people still managed to trade with each other, mostly at locale markets and fairs. And the church helped out by setting up trade networks and letting people use monasteries as trade centers. People also got smarter about building stuff during the Middle Ages. They figured out how to make bigger and better buildings, like churches and castles, using these cool techniques called barrel vaults and Romanesque architecture. And they got better at working with metals and using water and wind power, which was pretty neat. So the Middle Ages weren't all bad. People were pretty resourceful and came up with some pretty cool inventions. It wasn't like in the movies, but it wasn't all doom and gloom either. Explosion of artistic developments. The Dark Ages, popularly known as a time of intellectual depression, was actually pretty lit. It was like a nerd's paradise, with monasteries and convents keeping the knowledge flame alive. These places were like libraries and schools, all rolled into one, and became the headquarters for smart people like Bede, Alcuin of York, and Rabanus Maurus. They were basically the influencers of their time, shaping how people thought about stuff. They even invented a new writing style, Carolingian minuscule, which made it easier for folks to read and share ideas. Art and architecture during the Dark Ages were like a big mix of religion and society. Artists were super into Christian symbols, like in those mind-blowing illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells. They also built some pretty impressive buildings, like the ones with the round arches and thick walls, called Romanesque architecture. It was like a sneak peek at what was to come with Gothic architecture. Language and literature also had their glow up during the Dark Ages. People started to develop their own languages, and stuff like the epic poem Beowulf, the Exeter Book, and Bede's writings gave us a glimpse into how they thought about life back then. But let's not forget the real game changer of the Dark Ages, Christianity. This whole religion spread like wildfire across Europe, bringing everyone together and giving them a sense of unity. Monasteries were like the hubs of Christianity, where people learned about God and went on missions to spread the word. So, the Dark Ages weren't so dark after all. They were a time of major changes in the way people thought, expressed themselves, and believed in stuff, which set the stage for some pretty cool developments in the Middle Ages and beyond. Let's talk about why historians are always doubting this whole Dark Ages thing. The name dark has gotten a lot of heat lately, and a bunch of historians think it's time to give this misunderstood era a second look. Back in the day, some dude named Petrarch first said the Dark Ages were a time when things went downhill fast, calling it a period of darkness compared to the light of ancient times. But now historians are like, hold up, just a moment. That's way too simple. The Dark Ages weren't all bad. They say the dark story ignores all the good stuff that happened back then and only focuses on the bad times. They blame it on a few things, like the fact that a lot of written records from that time are gone, the rise of Christianity, and the way they put down non-Christian cultures. But hey, guess what? Some smart historians, like Pierre Richet and Peter Brown, have been digging into the Dark Ages, and they found a whole lot of cool stuff. They say it was actually a time of big changes and progress, not just decline. Peter Brown in particular is like, let's call it late antiquity instead. That way, we can talk about how much things were changing, not just getting worse. And you know what? Other historians are starting to agree with him. They say that after the Roman Empire fell apart, society, politics, the economy, and culture went through a major makeover. New kingdoms popped up. Christianity took over. People started farming and building things in new ways, and languages and literature changed a lot. One historian named Chris Wickham, in his book The Inheritance of Rome, says the fall of the Roman Empire wasn't like a sudden crash. Instead, it was a slow process that lasted a few hundred years. So, the Dark Ages weren't boring at all. Actually, they were a time of chaos, but also of creativity and change. This is when the foundation of modern Europe started to take shape, and it's where the seeds of the Renaissance were planted. Don't miss out on any of our upcoming videos. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Spread the love for travel, history, and knowledge by sharing our videos with your friends, family, and fellow explorers. Together, we can inspire and ignite a passion for discovery in people all around the world.